Hello, my name is Jo Roy, and I am a filmmaker, choreographer, and dancer. And I have the great privilege of being here at the National Film Board of Canada headquarters in beautiful Montreal. I'm actually here to celebrate the projection of my short experimental film, Corpus and the Wandering, which is being shown on the historic Wilder Building in the Quartier des Spectacles, which is very cool. I really would love to show you. So this is Corpus and the Wandering, and here we have the projection, which is very exciting. I would also really like to thank the team here, who is amazing and has made this incredible setup that will help me to talk about my process making Corpus and the Wandering. And so say hello to Simon and to Melissa, who will be moderating the conversation and sending me your amazing questions, which I am looking forward to hearing. And I encourage lots of questions. I love them. I really want to understand everything that you're thinking about as you hear about this very unique process. I love to have a good conversation. And this film took 3.5 years to create, and it was one of the most creative and inspiring periods of my life. So I'm very excited to share that time with you and what it was like to create with the National Film Board of Canada. And I was telling my team earlier that I was often coming out of conversations so excited about a 2-hour conversation about the philosophy of one specific shot that I actually had to go on walks because I was so invigorated. So I'm just very grateful for the institution and everything that they have done to support me and artists across Canada. So yeah, I would love to start by telling you about the concept of Corpus and the Wandering. It has a bit of a unique way of creating it. So, let me see. Getting used to this whole setup. So Corpus and the Wandering was made using only 3 items: my body, my iPhone, and a large blue exercise mat. And so I have a question for you, and you can think about it, and you can respond now, or maybe we'll return later. But if you have any ideas, you can definitely drop them in the chat. So if you had only these 3 items, how would you make an ocean? What do you think? Is there a way that you could make an ocean out of your body? So think on that and tell me later, and we'll get back to that shot. But yeah, so I made this film in my home, starting during the pandemic over the course of 3.5 years. And the way that I originally came up with the concept was actually because my mom, I don't know if she's in the chat or not, she does something called Feldenkrais, and it's sort of this a little bit like yoga. It resets your body, and she has these huge blue exercise mats, and I was really inspired by the idea of using that as a blue screen. So that was one factor that really led to this. The film I'm also a dancer. That's my background. I'm a choreographer, and so the film also has a bit of a dance component to it. So I'm going to show you a couple of the shots of it so you can kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about. So we have here, so one of the aspects of the film is that it's made of 100 videos in a grid. Every shot is made of 100 videos, and everything was created on my iPhone out of my body. So you can kind of see here how I needed to find a way to, this is a river, and I wanted to find a way to, oh sorry. I'm getting used to this whole thing. Okay. So I wanted to find a way to, you can kind of see the 100 squares here. And I made a river, and so each shot is made, it also moves. And basically, in a nutshell, the film uses this 100 square grid to critique society and how we have this grid system that is what everything is made up of, and how maybe there's a way that we can kind of create more connection within that. So I'll talk about some of that philosophy later on. But the film accomplishes this through the journey of a single woman and a look into her psychology. So I'd like to go through the poster with you guys and tell you about that. I'm getting used to this whole thing. Okay, so I want to tell you guys a bit about the name of the film and the different meanings of the brain as well, which is a very central video for the film. The brain is a visual representation of the title, Corpus and the Wandering. And there's a lot of different layers to that. You can see that the left brain here is the corpus. It's the literal body, while the right brain is the wandering, the journey. The left brain is also the part of it's the entire work as a whole. It's the whole process, and it's the structure, whereas the right brain is the creative process of experimentation that happened during the whole discovery. And so I just wanted to give you a little idea of how I made this shot as an example. So do you have any idea how I might have created this corpus section with the body in my house? Does anyone have any ideas?
Yeah, just one question.
One question? Yeah, yes, that's a good question. So the question here was the idea that the left side is more complex because it has to do with logic. Yeah, so the left being the left brain, I think they're both equally complex, but the idea was more that the left side is the structure of the brain, and the right side is a lot more frenetic because it is the creative process. And this is how I made the part of it that so this is how I made the portion. I did this fully clothed because it is a lot lot to see. So I kind of would start by assuming the final position that I knew I needed to create, and then I would roll out of frame so that I would be able to turn it around in post. And then for this hemisphere, the other one, the way that I created that was by using a pane of plexiglass that was balanced on 2 drawers, which I pulled out of my dresser. So that was interesting, and I can show you some of the footage actually, what that looks like. This is from under my feet. I had to lighten that so you could see it, but I had to film this in complete darkness, or else I wouldn't have been able to key it out properly. So when I first thought of the idea, it was born out of a lot of different things. I had been thinking for a long time about how society felt like it was going away, that was creating a lot of anxiety for a lot of people. I had this creeping feeling in the back of my mind that something was off, that something in our entire society globally is off. And it's hard to articulate, but I think it's something that a lot of people feel. And I was trying to figure out what that was, and it was an inquiry that I was thinking about a lot. And this was happening partially during the pandemic. So I also saw a lot of Zoom grids, as I'm sure a lot of you can relate to. And when I saw these grids, they made me wonder what would happen if I combined them in a way that used each small box as a pixel. Could I create something bigger that transcended the walls of the grid? And it was like almost like this technique that a lot of people learn in art class, where you create curves and connection and flow between different boxes. I wanted to see if I could make something that almost like a photo mosaic, except moving with video. So that's kind of how it came about. And I was also inspired by a song. It was originally I heard this song called Cameras Rolling by Agnes Obel, and it's this really beautiful, haunting music. And one of the things that I really love about music and dance as a dancer is the way that it expresses feelings and emotions and complex thoughts that you can't put into words easily. And so through this music, I was inspired, and it was just a lot of different things that came together at the same time, this Zoom grid inspiration and this feeling of so many thoughts that I had about myself as a woman, about myself as a dancer, as an artist, about my life, about my philosophy, about the way that I see society is going, and how can I visualize all of these things at once, but during a pandemic where there's no resources at all. And so that all kind of converged to create this idea in my mind. And I wasn't sure at first if I was going to be able to make a universe out of my body. How would I be able to do that? And so the first step that I took was just seeing if I could actually accomplish that. And so I did a test shot. This is the first shot that I ever created of the film. And there's some users from Brazil and the Czech Republic, so that's very cool. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, definitely put them in the chat. So yes, this is the first shot that I ever created. And I'm curious, does anyone have any guesses about how I made the river? Any guesses? No? So the river I made using one of my favorite moves as a dancer, which is an arm wave. I was thinking it could be kind of fun to teach you guys how to do that, actually. Maybe I can. Okay, so I want to show you how to do this. Can you see my arm? Maybe I can move back. So I was thinking about something that I often had to do as I was creating this film was, it starts out with an idea, a river. What part of your body looks like a river? And I also knew that I didn't want to ever repeat myself once I figured out an answer. So in this specific case, I think it's the first thing I ever tried. I thought about my arm wave, which I love, and it looks like this. And so maybe if you want to, you can follow at home, but I can kind of show you how to do this. And so the way that I like to teach this is I say there's 4 steps. Does that work? This way, okay. So we go fist, wrist, yes. Oh, that was very good, Simone. This one I call Egyptian because it reminds me of a hieroglyph. Wow, that's very good. You guys, you can't see him off screen, but he's doing a great job. Okay, so you go fist, wrist, Egyptian, and then this is pretty hard, but sometimes I put my hand on like a table or something, and then I straighten my hand and then put it into my shoulder, because your shoulder has to come up, but the easiest thing, sometimes you'll just go like this, people will go, oh, but the problem is the shoulder has to come up. So fist, wrist, Egyptian, shoulder, like that. So those are the 4 steps. And then you can keep going out. So you go fist, wrist, Egyptian, shoulder, and then go back to Egyptian, wrist, fist, out. So it actually looks pretty cool when you do it fast. But if you do it nice and smooth, so this is something I used to do when I was in ballet class. I would stand at the bar and I would just like practice this move. So that is how I did the river, I think I actually started originally, I wasn't sure yet if I was going to use little things to help me. And I think originally, I covered my arm in like oil or something to try to make it look more, more liquidy, but I stopped doing that later on. But yeah, so it's kind of like this. That's how I started that. And then, so I'll kind of show you, and since this was the first shot that I ever made, and I knew that I wanted to pitch this to the National Film Board, but I also knew that it was an idea that would be sort of difficult to explain if I didn't have an example or proof that I could make it. So I made this without ever actually knowing how to use After Effects very well. I did it in Premiere Pro, which caused a lot of complications since it's not really made for like a grid. So this is, as you can see, I kind of started multiplying this. Oh, someone had guessed a spinning arm. That's a good idea, yeah. So I started to multiply it, and then, yeah, and then this is kind of the second step that I did. Ooh. Here. This was actually pretty hard too, because I had to, time it all so that it would actually look like a river, the way that it was off time a little bit. So that took quite a while. And because I was doing this in Premiere Pro, which, if you don't know, that's an editing, that's linear time, like that's one timeline. So I had to crop every single square by itself individually, which took a really long time. And then I think it's kind of clear how I did the hills, but yeah, I'm sure that you guys can tell that that's hair. And the stars, I did, any guesses on how I made the stars? Yeah, we have a guest here from John. Yeah, so that's a good guess. So what I actually did, it's something that worked the first time, and I could never recreate it. But I used the flashlight on my iPhone, and I actually put it behind my hair, and then filmed it in the dark, and it would kind of create this glittering effect, which worked. But then anytime I tried to recreate it, I could never do it again. So I don't know, but yeah. So that was a cool thing. So I made this visual, and then I brought it to the National Film Board, and they responded very well to it. Shout out to Rob McLaughlin for that. That was amazing and very inspiring, kind of just took off from there. So if is there any questions yet about kind of some of that background? So I'm gonna maybe show you a little bit of my inspiration or how I became a filmmaker. Okay, so I found filmmaking, I think that this might have been a little bit clear, but from dance originally. I have danced for my whole life, and it was something that I was pursuing, but I was always very conceptual as a dancer. I really loved to ask questions and not make things that felt straightforward or expected. So when I discovered film, it was actually because while I was living in Los Angeles as a dancer, and there's a studio that I used to dance at every day, and they actually built a film school in the empty lot that was between my house and the studio, which is how I found filmmaking. And I never realized when I was younger, I always thought that it was a very technological sort of art, and it is, of course, but there's so much depth to it and so much poetry and potential. It really contains every other art form. You can say anything, you can learn anything, it uses music and visuals, and I find the way that it expands without boundaries so incredibly inspiring. And that was something that once I found, I could never let go of. That being said, because I started as a dancer, I am often inspired by movement still. And there's 5 main things that I try to accomplish in every project that I make. One of them, the first, is I love to make things that I'm not sure if I can make. I love to make things that are innovative, that just ask a question, and that I'm not really sure if it's going to be possible. The second tenet I have in the work that I do is I love to have movement in it or have it be inspired by movement. And then the other, of course, representation, and I really love to explore in a lot of ways what it's like to be alive. So I'd like to show you maybe a few things I can just kind of use as examples of things that I've made in the past. So this is a music video that I made for the artist Meg Myers that was created out of hand-colored drawings by children. So every frame is hand-colored by a different child. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so this is really fun. We had a lot of schools in my hometown, St. Albert, Alberta, and the Edmonton area, hand coloring these little coloring book pages. And it sounds sort of simple, but one of the things that was hardest about it was, you know, whenever you do projects like this that have never been done before, you can't really anticipate the challenges you're going to have. And in this case, it was actually the wax paper, the waxness of the crayon on the paper that made it difficult, because you would try to scan the pages and the wax would rub off. So that was actually the most challenging part of it. But I always love to have some sort of question of if it's possible. Here's another film that I made, which is actually made on 35mm film. And it isn't a green screen. This was shot on location. And I actually had to learn the dance so perfectly that I would be able to superimpose myself on myself and then have it line up properly because I wanted to do it on 35mm. So, yeah. So I like to think a lot about what it is that why I'm making something. Oh, I think I saw something from someone. Oh. Thank you. So once the film was greenlit, and then I was able to get some very good help with setting it up properly and figuring out what the workflow would look like. So I want to show you what the grid template looked like that I was using every day. So you can see that this is a grid of 100 boxes. And so the idea is that I would be able to take some footage of myself on my camera. This would have been my iPhone. This is a lot more high-tech than what I had. But, and then I'd come and drop it into a grid like this. And so here's the space that I was filming in for most of it. Oh. So you can see that it was a pretty small space, and I had to be very creative with how I was going to light it and how I was going to make it look professional. So there were many household items that went into this process. You can maybe see above my head the little detail of the light. You can see there's a pair of kitchen clamps basically that I put over the ceiling fan, and then I have a light attached to that. So I had to come up with a lot of different interesting solutions. I like to say this is my ex-boyfriend Perry, who I used as an extra C-stand. I also used a lot of random things. You can see in the left of the picture here that I have this is actually a broken space heater, which I used as an apple box to balance on when I was falling and all kinds of things. Was this my first attempt at making a film? Good question. It was not. I have made films before, but it was definitely my first attempt at making a film like this. But it was very fun. And thank you. Thank you. I love your old runaway animations. So fun. Thank you. And from Lucio, that's a cool name. That one, the colored crayon, how much time did it take to make that one? It took a couple months. It was really, as I was saying, it was the scanning that took a really long time. So let's get into, I want to show you a little bit of, or talk actually a little bit about the theoretical part. Trying to decide if I should go for the theoretical part or the construction first. Let's do, Hmm. I'm going to show you the beginning of the film and the thought process that went into that. Just loading. So the film starts out with this little box. And what I love about this first frame is that you don't realize that the box is actually looking at you because it is an eye. And you see that a little bit later, but I loved the idea of starting out the film where it's sort of like when you're on the street or something and you don't realize that someone's watching you, and then all of a sudden you notice and it's like, oh, my social face wasn't on. There's a really interesting voyeuristic sort of quality to that. But I would like to stop kind of on this frame and talk about this shot here. I'm curious what this feels like to you. I know that we can't hear the audio. I'm wondering what kind of emotions you're getting from it. And what does it look like? Does it look like, can anyone guess what this process is? I'm just going to let it play a little bit. Cells. Yes, it is cells. What kind of feelings do you feel in the eye? Does anyone have any idea? Cell division, that's correct. That's right. Reproduction. That's true. So there's a lot going on emotionally here. There was a lot that we needed to set up at once. There is, yes, this cellular division. We're starting with one cell, one person, one soul. And it feels to me like it's someone who's becoming alive. It's an existence. It's when you first feel existence. But it also has a feeling of fear to it, a feeling of being inside this box, being alone and lonely and afraid of existence. But also there's the theme of starting with the female gaze and starting with the female eye. And then we build. Yeah, it does. I think that's a good answer, Ryan, that it says it does feel dystopian. That's true. And so it's multiplying, and we're kind of populating the grid here. So so how do you think, this looks pretty simple, I think, in the execution, but it was actually a lot harder than you would think it was, because if you look, maybe I can show on this camera. If you actually use your eye and you look, can you see my eye? If you actually just move your eye to the side like this, right? It's like very hard to get a clear scan. And so the way that I actually had to film it was by taking my iPhone and moving my head. So I'd have my eyes on one position, and then I'd move my head with it so that it looked, so this is how I made sure that it was actually a smooth transition. It was like this. Because if I tried to go like that, I can't scan very smoothly like that, can I? Then we go into this second visual, which does anyone know what this is? Here's a little tip. If you go really far back, it's easier to figure out what it is. If you step really far back, because it kind of collapses it. It starts to look sort of like an orb for some reason, the further back you go. So one of the goals in this beginning of the film was to build the universe. So it starts with one cell, and then it gets to be that is duplicated, and duplicated, and then there's this. So anyone know something that was interesting that I didn't realize? Did you know that insects came before trees? I didn't realize that. But this is the first piece of nature that I was making, and I wanted to try to make it within the order that it was actually created in. And so this is a soldier fly's eye. Did anyone try walking back and like looking at it from far away? So I did actually recreate the real eye of a soldier fly, and that I had taken a picture of at the National History Museum? Yeah, and there were macro photos of insect eyes, and so I actually took a picture of a little piece of one and recreated all of the shading cell by cell. I think there's something like 1,500 of my eyes in this image. Yeah, exactly. Trypophobia. That's exactly right. It was sort of intentional to some degree. I like the horror aspect of it, but as I said, as you get back further, it's less scary looking for some reason. And then from there, we have, the next shot, which I'm curious to see if anyone can figure out what this is. And if anyone can guess how many of my irises are in this one. Anyone? There's about 2,000. And then there's a bunch of eyelashes too. So yeah, that one, I hand placed each of those. But this one so this is xylem. It's a recreation of tree cells that transport water. So I like the layers that this shot gives the film as well. I call it almost like a tree of life because it's starting to represent all of creation. So once we have built everything that exists, then naturally we have this shot that comes after, which I call this Eye of God. And I mean it in a everything that exists sort of a way. But what I love is that everything before this point is made of eyes, but this is not made of eyes. This is made of something that isn't an eye, but it is an eye. So anyone, I mean, this one has really strange clips. I'm excited to show you how I did that. So this is one shot from it. Do you see? So you can kind of see how on the edges of the frame, that's like right here, you can kind of see. And so this is not a very long clip, but basically what happens is that you go from the shot before, which is the tree of life, all of creation, and then this collapses in, and it's supposed to represent the singularity, which is the moment before the Big Bang. So that collapses, and then we get this, which is a black hole, at least my interpretation of a black hole. There's some in the film, there isn't the color, but I liked to play with. How do you think I did those flickering parts? Any guesses on that? And what do you think this is made of? So around Twitch questions. Oh, so someone had a really good guess about how many irises it was. So this one is made of irises still. This is still my eye. And the little flickers you see is just my eye moving or blinking. This is the only shot in the film, fun fact, that is a little bit colored. And the way that I created each of the effect of it moving out is layering different videos of the eye on top of each other and moving it. And then next, what happens is that there is this moment of static, which I'm proud of because I found out that apparently the Big Bang, I could be wrong. Someone, if you know about this, tell me, but apparently static is interference that's actually from the Big Bang still. Did anyone know that? You knew that? Yeah. So anyway, I was kind of excited about the idea that I could show static after, because it's just what happened. But then beyond this layer of the opening, which is supposed to be in some ways what you might call Genesis or something, it's the universe existing and developing outwards to be all of creation. There's also the level of wanting it to feel completely overwhelming in its sensory experience. And the reason for this is I feel that we are in a time where it's just very overwhelming how much demand there is for our attention in every direction, and all of this dopamine. It's just a very overwhelming time. Is that something that anyone has experienced when you're doom scrolling or wondering. There's a couple people here. Adam Block, did you just join the chat? Hi. And Switch Easy, thank you so much. I appreciate that. So that whole opening, there's a lot to unpack as far as the actual meaning of all of that work. I think I'd like to go into that part of things. So this is a little bit getting into a bit of a nerdy section, but I think it's important. And the reason is because as filmmakers, as artists, what we make has a huge reverberation on the world. And I think it's a responsibility that we have to take very seriously. When you make a film, it's important to think about why you're making it. And so that's a process that I went through deeply for this project. So the quote that starts the film is, keep adding things. Society, or separation, is the alpha and omega of the spectacle, which is from this amazing book called The Society of the Spectacle. Is anyone familiar with this book? So this is a really incredible book that details how in modern society we are basically alienated from each other in this sort of atomization and grid system that keeps us sort of in our own bubbles, whether it's in the featureless apartments, in the iPhones and screens, or our cars. It's just everywhere. Social media grids. It's this sort of way of separating everyone, and by doing that, it makes them easier to control, because then we're reunited through our central experience of mass media and consumption. And we're taught that if we want love, then it's something that we have to become worth having. And so we try to earn that through accumulating material wealth and looking good enough. It's this entire way of alienating people from their own worth. And so this is something that Guy Debord talks about a lot in this film, it is a film, but also in his book, is how we are atomized from each other and then reunited through that central spectacle. And there's some other references that were also very interesting that talked about this kind of similarly. This is a book that I love called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And there's a quote from that which says, "In the age of advanced technology, spiritual devastation is more likely to come from an enemy with a smiling face than from one whose countenance exudes suspicion and hate, who is prepared to take arms against a sea of amusements." So there's the theory that, 1984 is one of my favorite books, but that was, there was the idea that maybe we would have this control where we wouldn't be able to have enough information, but really society has gone a different way maybe, where we have so much information that it's kind of hard to even know where to look, and it robs us of our freedom mentally, because we constantly have to invest back into this system in order to be relevant, in order to participate in society. And another book that was really helpful to me is this one, which is called Psychopolitics by Byung-Chul Han. And he talks in this book about how we've become our own prison guards in what he calls essentially a panopticon. So a panopticon is a prison where basically there's a central tower where the guards are, and then there's all of these little cells that the prisoners are around that central guard tower, and they never know when they're being watched. They're always on display. And he speaks about how we've become our own prison guards, and we've internalized the system of oppression basically to make ourselves into the product and make our whole lives about being good enough. And it's not even just work now, it's all the time. We're constantly thinking about how we can be worthy and of love, and it's this system of atomization that is reinforcing this whole belief system. I'm just gonna move these. I keep adding things to this. There we go. And another person who I found really interesting in the process of creating this film, his name is Hundertwasser, and he's an architect. And he said that the straight line is the downfall of humanity. And what he meant by that is that the straight line never exists in nature. It never happens. If you look at buildings versus trees, and it's just a pattern that is never happening naturally. And so if we think in a way that doesn't reflect nature or any real existence, then where does that thinking lead to? So if you follow that line of thinking, you can end up in a place that shows the extremes of atomization and this sort of conveyor belt mentality, which lacks humanity and is just about creating and creating and creating and never having enough. And so the question is, what's the other side of that? How can we have a more sustainable society? During the pandemic, I joined a mushroom book club, a mycology themed book club, and it was really interesting. I know it sounds maybe a little random, but I remember the first conversation I had with the guy who runs the club, and he told me that only about 5% of fungi have been discovered, which is a really interesting fact. How is that possible? But I don't think there's been very much interest in mushrooms up to this point, or fungi, because I think that people are scared of fungi, maybe because they're scared of decay, because they're scared of death. And you can think about that when you consider how, what is the Mushroom Book Club? It's a book club that discusses fungi and mushrooms, but also it's the whole mentality behind mushrooms. It's a very different way of thinking than how our society is structured, which is so based on, again, lines and pristine atomization. And mushrooms, if you look in nature, it's all curves, it's all branches, it's all intertwined webs. And so I guess on the surface, it is a book club that studies mushrooms, but underneath it, philosophically, there's really a lot to discover. Have I read it? Yes, I know. I haven't actually read it yet, but I do have it. But maybe something you've read, Marty, that I'm about to talk about is actually Staying with the Trouble. Do you know that book? Because that was a really big inspiration, something that I wanted to talk about. So this is a book called Staying with the Trouble, which is by Donna Haraway. And in this book, she talks about a few really incredible things like tentacular thinking, which is a theory she has based on tentacled creatures like octopi who have neurons in their limbs, and so they think with their whole bodies. And so I love that way of thinking. It's so opposite to have this whole synthesized way of existing in the world, and it feels like something that is more sustainable. So she has some really incredible views. And this might be another one that's, sorry, Lucio Mazzaro, you said to build those mosaic images, did you do any prior testing? I mean, before editing or even before saving the images? Yeah, it was a very complicated process because I never knew when something was going to work, and I was just constantly having to experiment to see what would land. So I would just have an idea of, okay, I'm going to make a river, how do I make that? And I would just try something and then bring it into my timeline, see if it was working or not working. So the testing, but often my early tests would end up being what I used, and I wouldn't know when I took the clip that I was going to use it. So sometimes I would go back and think, oh, well, maybe I should have lit that better or something, but it was really hard. I have so many files, it's insane. It was very complicated. Oh, you read, Marty read A Cyborg Manifesto in undergrad. I haven't read that, but it sounds, I know some of the ideas that she has from that book, which there was a concept that Donna Haraway talked about where she said something about being inspired by like butterfly antennas, and how can we use these animals to actually inspire technology and, again, create a more sustainable society out of ideas like that, instead of something that's completely divided from nature. This one is probably one that a lot of people are familiar with and are inspired by. Anyone? Robin Wall Kimmerer, Braiding Sweetgrass. So this is an incredible book, and she has some very beautiful ideas about, it's some of the most beautiful and poetic writing that I've ever read. And it just makes you see nature so much differently and our place in it. So the beginning of the film that I showed, so that's basically an overview of the structure of how we're going from something that's very atomized and creates this alienation from people to something that is sustainable and interconnected. So the first part of the film, which I already showed you, was wanting to have this feeling of what the kind of society that we've been in, what that feels like for us, that sensory overload. But then past the static, we get to the point of the other side of things, the healing side. So let's go through some of the construction for that. So here we have this first visual for the what I call the wandering section. And we have where we have this image that is very much a interconnected flowing piece. It represents a lot of things. I mean, this comes after the brain in the order, so it feels a little bit like branching neurons. It also feels like the top view of a river, of a delta from really far away. And so we start with this further shot. I mean, I think this one is pretty clear how I made, but I'm curious if anyone can call out how I did that. I'll show you some footage of it. Yeah, so I did that with wet hair that I wrapped around my fingers. I had to wet my hair because if it wasn't wet, it wasn't dark enough to visually separate. So that's how I made the river. It was pretty hard to get all of the little configurations though, because as you can see, to actually get them to connect, there's all of these different streams. So I ended up in a lot of strange positions trying to make that happen. The hardest part was getting the curviness of it. You can imagine how long this took. So we went through the riverbank, I believe, already. Let's go to this skull. So we were at this riverbank. Something else that you'll notice in the film is there's a theme of water where significant parts of the film are around bodies of water. So we have this reveal of the skull. Any ideas how I did this part? I mean, I think you can tell that that's hands, right? But I'm wondering if anyone can figure out how I actually did the effect of taking away the skin. Okay, I'll show you. Where is it? Oh, I keep doing that. Thanks. So here's the raw footage of this one. Did anyone guess that? That was a fun one. It does take, yes, Rachel said, that must take pretty long time. Very Blue Man Group, very true, yes. It does take a very long time, very, very long. It took me 3.5 years to make this film. Okay, this is a fun one I want to show you. So later on in the film, this woman is, oh, there we go, running. There I have my mushrooms, my favorite. Any ideas how I made those? Yeah, that one's funny. These ones are made out of, actually the folds in my neck. Like this. You want to see? Like this. Yeah, that's how I made the mushrooms. And then for the ridge of the edge of the mushroom, I wore a blue swim cap and colored my ear with a blue marker, and that's how I made the edge of the mushroom there. So this woman is running through the forest. Oh, yes. Here's some behind the scenes of that. Like, I mean, there were so many layers. This one was really hard based on just how many different layers I had. I had to make a lot of different kinds of trees so that it wouldn't look like the same tree over and over again. So I have the question, how do you manage to not make After Effects crash? It's a really good question. I think well, there was a few ways. I did have to sometimes divide an image into quadrants or layers so that it would be able to handle it, and then I would combine those layers afterward. So that was one strategy, but it also took a lot of patience, for sure. Let's look at this one. So this specifically, this mantis, was quite complicated because I had to figure out how to separately do each part of it. Ryan asked, what was the most difficult part of making the film? There was a lot of different parts that were difficult. One of them was the fact that every day was completely new because I didn't want to repeat myself, and every problem was completely different. Because maybe, for instance, what you're looking at right now, the mantis, this mantis moves a little bit, but it's so particular because I'd have to make this square, then I have to make this square, I have to figure out how to recreate each part of it. But that's a different challenge than something like over here, how do I make something look like a tree? How do I make something look like an ocean? How do I make something look like a whale? So all of those different, it depends on the shot, like what the camera movement was, and and what the texture was. It was always different like that. So that was complicated. Just how tedious it was, that was complicated. And also, I think, because it's an experimental film, you want it to feel effective and you want it to have a flow that, like a momentum to it. And even though it's more of an emotional painting, it still needs to feel purposeful. So figuring out that structure for the film was also something complicated. So I'm going to show you what this looked like on the level of my project, this mantis. It's different when you can see the color of it, right? You haven't seen the skin colored, well, I guess there probably are skin colored mantises actually. How did you decide on which animals you were going to create? Did you choose these particular ones because of their symbolism? Yes, I originally didn't know that I was going to have animals in it other than the birds. I liked the idea of the birds. They were far away, and I thought the universe was going to be a lot more lonely in this way, that the animals weren't really going to exist, but the animals ended up kind of finding me through the process of making it. Believe it or not, I actually woke up one day and had a praying mantis above my bed that was just sitting there, which is crazy. It was a big one too. And there's another shot in the film where there was a butterfly that I recreated. You wouldn't really notice it. I'd have to kind of point it out to you. But one day I was going for a walk and I just saw this massive butterfly just as I was going down these steps. It was just spread like this, just lying on the stair. And it felt like it was a black butterfly with these little white markings. And it just felt like such a moment of discovery. So I ended up making that. So it was kind of like the animals found me in a way. So I want to show you how, oh, we have another question. So I want to show you how this actually worked. I wanted to show you guys what the actual process kind of looked like. So let's try actually filming something. So I'm going to show you the raw footage that I ended up using in the beginning. This is really, really rough, as you can see. And let's take a square and look at how we could maybe recreate that. So which part are we thinking? If you look at the head, you see that he turns. You see that he kind of comes up and then he turns his head. So does anyone have an idea of, maybe it's like maybe you can't see it well enough, I don't know. But any idea of how you might be able to create that? I can try something. So I'm gonna make the part of his head this little square here, so you can kind of see his mouth. So let's try that. So I'd come over to my camera. And so as we saw in the footage, there was a bit of he comes up a little bit and then he turns. So I'd have to kind of match it to the music, but the way that it would work is I'd think, okay, how can I make that on my body? It kind of looks like my hands put together, so I have to do a little bit of a move up, and then it has to turn. And then I'd have to look at the specifics of the details. So which way is he facing? Oh, maybe I should take this. Maybe that'll make it easier. So his head looks like it's kind of angled. So he comes up like this, turn. That looks like it might have been too, ooh. There we go, like that. So down, up, turn, like that. Can we try, let's try one, would you mind cutting and then we can put another one? Because it's kind of a long clip. Yeah, there you go, that's the whole movement. So the clips sometimes didn't take very long to actually shoot. Sometimes they took a really long time, but they're just so small. Thank you. Okay, so we have our clip. Put it in here. Okay. So we have our movement. Just here, and then we turn. Okay. So then we come back and we drop it in. Make it smaller like that. Kind of like a little puzzle piece. Okay, so we know it's in this square roughly. Okay, let's see what we have here. So we have the other pieces already set. We're going to add this one in. Where is it? Oh. And so I had this grid that I showed you earlier that I was lucky to have the help of my friend Amos Susagan and also the incredible tech team at the National Film Board, like Frank Nadeau. And so we're just going to move this in, position it, and then see how it's working. Okay, so I have to do, okay, so it's a little too soon. So when does this start coming up? There, okay. Then this has to match. Okay, the timing is a little off because I should have gone later and paused for a second. So sometimes that's why we use like a, I had timed it to the music originally, but you can kind of get the idea. And so every single part of this frame was every single part of this frame was having to figure out how you could recreate each of these squares. So if you look at, say, this one right here, this box, how would you be able to recreate that with your body? I noticed when I went a little bit more full, for instance, here, I think I ended up doing like a hand and then like a fist underneath it or something like that, because it kind of looks similar, has a similar kind of feeling. And then how would you do the legs? The legs, anyone have an idea of that? Because look how skinny they are. Okay, we can kind of try it. So let's watch just his little leg here. Do you see how his knee just kind of comes up a little bit? So the way I would create something like that, I can show you that one too. I don't know if we'll be able to get it super accurate in this time, but okay, so we know how skinny his leg is. I'm just going to show you the way that I did this. I used a nice little hair elastic. Took a tiny little piece of hair, divided it like this. And then would take one of the interesting household items I was using on the blue screen. And so I'd look at the movement. And again, we have a bit of this like knee going on here. So I'm just going to show you on the screen behind me. So you see this knee. And so then I would take my finger and kind of try to create the exact bend of the knee. And this part took a lot of subtlety because it's not a huge movement. So it was just something like this. But it was all about, again, getting the right connection point. It's similar to another area that I showed you already, the river, where you saw all the little streams of rivers. One of the hardest parts about that was getting it to be the same amount of hair, because some of the rivers were thinner than other ones. So yeah, it was a process. Woo. I learned how to just break these because they get knotted really easily. Went through a lot of hair elastics. Woo. Okay, I think the next one, I'm actually really curious to see what you guys think of how I made that one. This is still a little bit stuck. Yeah, there we go. So we have this. I want to go to this film, this part. I want to see what you guys think. How did I make this one? This one's a little weird, I have to say. There's a few layers going on here. How do you think I got the effect of the light changing? A little bigger on the screen. Is it big? Oh, this way? Cool. So this one, okay, I'm not going to show you a clip of this because it's a little strange. But I had a severe sunburn. And I actually ended up using what you think I would. Yeah. So I was peeling. Yeah. So I used that fortuitous event, and I would shine light actually from below and then also around. So to kind of create this strange sort of translucent product. And then the other layer for this is my scalp. You might be able to see that. You can see it obviously with this big one, but these ones are also kind of little scalps. This one is a fun one to talk about. So we finally got back to that ocean. How do you think that I made this ocean? Any guesses? How's it going on that? Yeah. So this was made using my hair, which I whipped. That's how I made the ocean itself, like this. I tried a lot of things. I tried that you've seen in other pieces as well, but that ended up being what was the motion that gave the most power for something that felt like a stormy ocean. And then the lightning, actually I can show you that clip. Let me find it. So this is the original. This is what it looked like, the original clip. Yeah, it is. That is my scalp, yes. So this is the original clip, as you can see in slow motion. And then I layered that so you can kind of see how the water works. And then I added highlights using, what I actually did for this is I licked my arm and then I went like this. And the light glinting off my arm is how I made the highlights of the ocean. And I guess I can get out of this now. Oh. And then for the trees, does anyone have a guess of how, does anyone have a guess of how I made the trees? So the trees were made using, I have the question, did you use anything that wasn't your body? Was it tempting? There was only actually one time in the entire film where I had anything that wasn't my body, and it was the Eye of God that I showed you, because that was one of the first things I made, and I think I used a little bit of mascara to create the eyelashes. I'll show you that clip. Or maybe it was a pen. But that was really early on, and after I did that, I never used, I think after that point I decided never to do that again. So for example, whenever I wanted to create the impact of the feeling of something that I wanted to make it look drawn on, I actually used the ashes of burnt hair. So I can show you an example of that. So if you look at these birch trees, for example, it's my fingers painted with ashes. So we have, back to this cliff. The cliff itself was an interesting practice because it's a rock face, and rock is hard, and I am a woman, and we're not supposed to have texture really on our bodies. So this is a really interesting practice to seek out those parts of myself that looked like rock, and it was objectifying myself in a very different way than one would normally think of as those terms. So in this rock face, you can see my cellulite and my chapped lips and my wrinkles, all sorts of things. It's an interesting composition, that one. So at this point of the film, is displaying the woman's inner thoughts. So this part I knew that I wanted it to feel like an arcing shot, but clearly that's not something that I'm able to do in my house. So I came up with the solution of using a swiveling chair to get this shot. So here's the raw footage. And then we have this overhead shot of the woman looking down at these waves. So I wanted to find a way to have that vanishing perspective where it feels like it's really far away. And I tried a few things and it wasn't really working, and it wasn't really convincing. But then I think the way that I ended up doing the cliff was by actually having my hand like it was downwards, so the ground is like this, but I'm going to show you on this camera. Thanks. So I realized that if I created sort of like this, basically, then it looked like this was, like fingers are farther away, and so that I could build it away this way, like that. So that's kind of how I created the vanishing perspective of that. We have some bruises here. It's kind of funny when I was in the process of this and I'd get a bruise or something like that, then it was, for me, kind of a plus because I would be able to use it for texture. The waves, these are pretty complicated to be able to actually tell what makes these. There is a bit of a, there's something in the waves that if you look close enough, you can see that's kind of a giveaway, but I'm not sure if anyone can notice that. There's a belly button in the waves. It's my belly button. Yeah, so I made it using, naturally. So I made it by pushing my stomach out and bringing it in, and it was this pulsating feeling. And then I overlaid that, I think, with saliva. So I'm not going to show you that part, but. Oh, and then the other thing that I did, I was excited about having some fog here. You can kind of see the fog? Yeah. Does anyone have a guess for that part? Yes. So the way that I did that, here's some raw footage. Of me attempting to get this fog right. Yeah. So I had to wait all year for that. Yeah. So the hard part about this was trying to get, because get the angle right and get the mouth shape right, because I think I found out over the course of creating this that if I blew like, it would be too much. I had to kind of like keep my mouth. You can see that it was a little hard to keep myself from laughing as I was creating this. Yeah, like Lucio Mazzaro said, thank you, Eileen, appreciate it. Lucio says, like a belly dancer, yes, exactly like a belly dancer. I might actually have a clip of that I can show you. Yeah, here you go. Yeah, that was one layer of, so I made a whole wall of basically bellies. So this part of the film, the woman is staring over this cliff, and then it was very much the feeling of when you're at it was like a very overwhelming feeling. And she's feeling anxiety and all of these different emotions. And at this point, she turns inward and reconnects. So I have this next shot. This is what we ended up doing. I think this is, so I had a lot of tests for this shot. But I knew that I wanted it to feel like this character was reconnecting to herself and nature and the universe, basically. And I knew that this would be one of the moments in the film that had what felt like real choreography. So I had a lot of different early iterations of this scene that tried different things like this. And it was an interesting challenge as a choreographer, because you can create choreography with all of these different squares, whereas a lot of the film, it's a question of whether it actually does apply as choreography or not, because it's like nature, it's moving, but is it necessarily emoting is a big question. But this is specifically a scene of the film that does have specifically choreography. And there's just so much potential to using choreography within these squares. So that there's different things I tried that. This one I really liked as well, the background. But I ended up really loving the way that this shot just feels like a horror movie with her face melting. There's something about that, and something about kind of looks like an angel's wings. And just the severity of her falling over and over and over. It kind of makes her look like a witch to me, and I love that. And this is also the scene where I was talking about the butterflies are actually in this scene. Let me find them. So I can show you, this is the one I was talking about where this is the butterfly markings on the sides that I was talking about. So I recreated the real markings of butterflies. And I created them out of, any guesses? Anyone? So I created the markings out of my teeth and my fingernails. So that was a fun day because I had to white out my teeth. I looked like a pirate. Yeah. So I had to isolate. That was my way of isolating my teeth like a blue screen, was to use this weird marker. And I used my nails. Thank you. Appreciate that. So this next part of the film, so she basically throws herself off a cliff. And there's this entire section that's her falling. It's very Alice in Wonderland. And it's the only part of the film that has an edit, if you will. Everything else feels like shots that you stay on and are meditative. And this one part of the film is this tumbling shot where there's a million different angles, and it should feel frenetic in a different way. So that was an interesting exploration. And also how, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of VFX artists out there who have faked falling in various capacities in various films. But yeah, it's not super easy to do when you don't really have any, like when you're just doing it in your room. So here's a shot here's an example. I actually shot some of this falling section at my family's office building. So there happens to be a second floor balcony where I could basically pretend to fall. And this is a bunch of Feldenkrais. I told you about these mats that are taped together to create this sort of blue screen, and that's my dad holding a fan. So I had to I would have moments that felt like they were accurately falling, but they wouldn't be very long. So I would really have to find like convincing moments. And there's a lot that, to keep it interesting, I did a lot of different experiments on what was happening in the shot. This is, I think, an early ear canal. Let me see if I can find that. Yeah, I used an ear canal at one point to create. Let's see, where is it? There we are. So we have this falling shot here. Yeah, so this first ear canal, I want it to feel like a tunnel where she's falling down this hole, basically. Which, again, I call it the ear canal because it's pretty literal, obviously. And I made this. Here's the raw footage for that. So again, I used the light to create dimensionality to the ear. And it was always a question of how to make each of the shots have an element of movement to them. Here's another part of the sequence that I made I made a spider web out of one strand of hair, which was multiplied many times. So I had to film this in the dark. Here, I can show you. And I used the flashlight to light up one strand of hair. Ryan asks, what made you want to make an experimental film? Do you plan to make more? It's a good question. I think that I'm very deeply inspired as a filmmaker to create things that I don't know if they can exist. So that's part of it, is the unknown. I'm a very curious person. If I know how to do something, it's less interesting to me. And I also think that it's an artist's responsibility to try and push a medium forward and to explore parts of it that haven't been done before. But I also think that narrative is amazing and it's beautiful and it can communicate a lot of messages for society. But sometimes it can also, it's very, very linear. And what I love about an experimental film is that it can feel like an emotional painting. I can take an emotion and really think about what that feels like, and the visuals don't have to be something that are literal. It creates a language that has a lot more potential maybe than something that's a story. It's saying, I have this feeling, what would that look like in images? So a lot of, I like to create films that more feel like a cathartic experience for an emotion that you're having. And I think that experimental film allows for that sort of exploration. And yes, I do plan to make more. Many more. So another thing that there we go. I really liked the idea of actually falling into a black hole here. Another aspect of this film that was fun, if you remember at the beginning of the film, there is this point of the Big Bang, and then the Big Bang happens, and there's some discussion about time. I've read some books about the concept of time, and that, is it linear, does it go one direction? Something that's really hard to wrap your head around, but the concept of time within this film is something that is not constant. So things can go backwards. It's very confusing in that way. Again, very much like Alice in Wonderland. So returning to this black hole feeling, I actually made this part of the falling sequence. This is, I don't know if anyone's familiar with what it's like to fall into a black hole. But I guess theoretically, if you were, there's a process called spaghettification, where you would become basically a noodle, because the part closest to the black hole would get stretched out and you'd become this like one cellular noodle going through it. So here I am. Oh, thank you. Captain Kesh said, you give us such Marina Abramovich vibes. Do you know who that is? Yes, very much. So cool to see a filmmaker thinking outside the typical entertainment, Michael Bay explosion, CGI every 2 seconds vibes. Thank you. Yeah, so then you can kind of see this is the extension of that. It's also a bit like spaghettification, but it's also showing this classic shape that we see in nature as well. And then I actually do have, one of the shots is a recreation of an actual, I don't know if anyone can recognize this, but this is me recreating the actual, I think it was the first picture ever of a black hole. So it actually looks a lot like it. If you had the picture, you could compare the first ever photograph of a black hole. It looks almost exactly like this. I'm pretty sure I did that with my eyes. I think it is my eye. And then you can see there's a bunch of little me's everywhere. So all existing simultaneously in different universes, I'm sure. And so I was telling you earlier about how I employed a lot of random items in my house to create some of these effects. So here is how I used that space heater I told you about. That's me flying on it. Yeah. And then we have a fan here to give me the effect. So yeah, there's a lot of different configurations going on. And here's another one. Here's a little bit of freestyle I was doing to try to emulate a falling person. The fan's right under me there. Yeah, so I would just take pieces, that looks pretty crazy, but little pieces of it that were convincing. You can see it was a pretty chaotic creation experience. Okay, these birds. I don't know, I feel like this one's pretty obvious, but you tell me. What do you think? You guys got it? How did I make that one? I mean, I feel like you can kind of see with the wings, but it's the body that's harder to tell. Is there any ideas? Yeah, okay, I'll show you how I did this one. Oh, someone said, shadow puppet hands. Oh, Grumpy Pecan also said, for the pop culture fans, spaghettification is pictured in a really cool way in the Marvel series Loki. I'll have to check that out. Very cool, thank you for letting us know. And Marty Martin, shadow puppet hands. Yes, that's actually a really good way of putting it. So, am I? Cool. So the way that I did it was, like this part, you can kind of see the wing. I don't really remember how I had figured this out. I can just do it here. But, is it this way better? Yeah. I'm not good at that hand though. I'll go this way, okay. So I wore a long sleeve, like this. And then, so this is half of it. So I'm creating the body with this hand, and then the wing with this hand. So my question is this. Do you guys think that this is dance? What do you think? Or is that just movement? What's the difference? So when you mirror that footage, it looks like this. So then you have a bird flying. That one was a little bit less work intensive than some of them, for sure. All right, this is one of my favorites. So something I didn't touch on a lot was at the point where the woman is on the cliff and she has ran through this forest, and it's been this feeling of wanting to flee the anxiety that she's feeling, all of the emotions, and she gets to the edge of this cliff, is completely overwhelmed, and it's like she has two options. She either she can't continue that way, and so it's this feeling of having to let go or not being able to survive anymore. And so at the moment when she throws herself off the cliff, figuratively, I guess literally in this case, but it's almost like a symbolic death or a literal death of everything that she knows, and it's a having to start over kind of a thing. So she's died at this point, and then the birds are the first visual you see after that. And the point of the birds is almost like this feeling of anytime, you know, when you have a bad day and something traumatic happens and you'll go outside and the sky is still blue and there's still people walking their dogs and no one realizes what your world is like. It just keeps going. And each of us has that presence where we are one little piece of sand in this universe, and when we're gone, it goes on. And there's something really tragic about that, but also something very beautiful about that feeling. And so I don't know how to really explain it, but those birds are this feeling of it goes on is what I wanted to evoke in that moment. So then Nick, this shot, it started as I knew that I wanted to have an arcing sort of tunnel of light, almost feeling like it's the white light that she's going towards, like heaven is at the end of the tunnel. But through the experience of making the shot, somehow it turned from this tunnel to a tree. And this tree cookie kind of a feeling I became inspired by, and I liked the idea of this like turning tree cookie kind of thing, because there's something so ancient about it and wise. And so the way that I created this part, don't know, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. Do you have guesses? Yeah, so it's my fingertips, my fingerprints, which I covered in ashes from burning my hair. Which I love the, you're like, what? Which I really love the symbolism, because it's like this cut down tree. It's like it symbolizes death in some ways. And then the ashes also, it's cremation in some ways, quite literally, right? So there's a lot of symbolism in that. It was interesting, around the time that I was making this shot, I went to this tea ceremony and met this tea expert who it was between this shot and the brain earlier. He had a condition where his brain didn't drain fluid, and he had something underneath his brain to drain the fluid. And it was really inspiring because he had like thousands and thousands of paintings around his studio that were his brain covered in flowers, which was this really, it was like he compulsively painted his brain covered in flowers. It was such a beautiful, healing metaphor. And he also talked about some basically like in a previous relationship, some children, like there's someone else's like daughters who he was close to, and then the relationship ended and never got to see them again. And it was this really tragic thing because he really loved them. And so he talked about, so in these images of his brain, there was also a lot of cut down trees, which was his way of showing and evoking the feeling of death that he had from that. So it was just a cool experience. Now when I see this, I think about him and the symbolism that he had about death that was the same as the image that I was creating at the time. The whales, does anyone know how I made those? This is my favorite. It's my favorite one. Any guesses? So the whales I made out of my tongue. Yeah, this is called tongueography. Yeah. So I'll show you how that kind of translates into a whale. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a lot of tongues. But you can see, like, it was really the choreography on the sides and the movement of the whale's fins that was a little complicated. And I used one of the tools that came in handy quite often through the process was a medical glove, which I showed you earlier. These came in handy a lot. Thankfully, it was during the pandemic when there was a lot of these around. So the way that I did this was I cut a slit in the glove and put my tongue through it. That was how I keyed out my tongue. And so originally these whales were actually supposed to be for a different shot. They were for the shot I showed you earlier, the cliff shot. But you can see, I think I have an example. Also, I mean, I know we're going backwards, but I did a lot of different tries on water, and some of them worked better than others. So here I was trying to make a realistic wave, and it worked like okay. I mean, not as well as some of the other things, which is why it didn't survive. I have a lot of old tests that didn't survive, but and I'll show you just how I made that, because I guess I kind of dabbled my fingers and moved them around. So yeah, that one didn't end up sticking, but I actually did make the whales originally for this scene. Do I have the one? Oh, here they are. But they didn't really look right as the scale. It kind of ruins the illusion. Got a question, says, what happened to all of your failed tests? I still have them. I'm having trouble letting go. And I don't know, maybe one day they'll come in handy. I still have everything. It's really a lot of files. And okay, my point was the whales weren't working in that scene because they were ruining the illusion, but I really liked the whales and I didn't want to get rid of them. And I don't know why I tried this. Commitment issues, yes, exactly. I don't know why I tried this, but I just put the whales in here and I really loved the effect. And I think there's something extremely timeless about this like rotating tree trunk, and whales are both very wise, ageless. I mean, it's two of the oldest things in the world together. So there's like an ancient wisdom to this that, again, I think transcends one life. And the idea of these whales swimming through wood, I don't know why, I just really liked the feeling of that. They look like barnacles on the tail. Yeah, I know, that's a good point. I actually don't even think I thought about that. One thing I loved about using my tongue for the whale, and I'll show you again because I do really love that, is it looks like it's like reflecting the water. Like if you put it under the water, it looks like it's reflecting the surface, which was neat in some iterations of it. I guess you can't really see it as well with the wood over it. So then continuing on about this part of the film where you've gotten the birds, you've gotten that this goes on moment, you have the feeling of her kind of seeing the white light, if you will. And then what happens next is her cell dispersion. She goes back to the universe. So this is another one of the only shots that I would call choreography in the film. So we have all this, yes. And so I was trying to think, okay, how can I make separate particles out of my body? Any ideas? What was your idea? Yes. Yeah, so Simone was saying that it was maybe something like this, right? What I did was, again, the handy little gloves, I cut off the end of each fingertip. I think I brought my scissors so I can, where did I put them? Oh, here they are. So, I think I got it. Okay, so I just cut off the ends like this. I think this is the only thing I tried for this scene. I think it worked pretty quickly. So you got fingertips off. And then there you go. So I had this, and then again, one of the styles of dance that came in handy the most is through the process of creating this film was waving, which is something people don't realize. It's actually a form of street dance, hip-hop dance. There's a style of dance called popping within hip-hop dance, which is all about illusions, and it's all about muscle control and stuff like that. And so waving is like a subsection of popping. And it's all illusion, because some forms of popping are more like static movements, and then some are more about creating fluidity. So this is another moment where having a little bit of background in that kind of created was helpful. So someone said, did you end up dreaming about these shots? This is Faux Raptor. Did you end up dreaming about these shots at night because you were so immersed and focused on the film? That is a good question. I can't really remember if I did. I know that by the end of the film, I will say that I was doing 16-hour days for like 6 months to try and finish the film, because I'd worked on it for over 3 years, and it was still going. And the only way that I could get it done was just to be like, I don't exist. No one knows I'm here. Told my friends, my family that, and I just didn't leave my house for months. So I don't really remember if I dreamed about them, but I do know that every waking moment was an obsession with them. And at the same time, it never really felt heavy. It always felt like a burning fire. It always felt exciting and invigorating, and like every day was sometimes it was hard to start, because it's like when you have writer's block. And the problem with this is that every experiment was completely different. So I didn't really have somewhere to start. I had to start over. There's no momentum. It wasn't, okay, today I'm gonna do 20 frames just like I did yesterday or whatever. It was like, how am I gonna do this? I have no idea what this specific element is going to look like. Is this going to work? Is this going to work? So it was like a really, really fun, but very involved problem. And I almost would say it was compulsive. It was like OCD, trying to finish this film. And but I was grateful for it every single day. So dispersion, that's what I call that one. So she has dispersed into the universe. Oh, another thing I should add, I had a really, really amazing sound team for this film. I had an incredible sound designer named Alex Verbitsky, and he is a genius and is one of the most technically intelligent people I've ever met, but also is a ballet dancer. So he really understands movement and subtlety, and that was amazing. And my composer is Zoe Keating, who's incredible. And I don't know if you've heard her music, but if you haven't, you need to check it out. She's very, very talented. And this was one of the only sections, how do I explain this? Because I'm a dancer and a lot of my stuff is based on music already, I might have choreographed the film already to a track, but then there was pieces of it that that I would make it first, and then she would score what I'd made, and then other parts where I needed her to create the music, and then I would choreograph to that and create the movement. So this is one of the moments in the film where she had to create the music so that I could create the choreography afterwards. So we have now the moment in the film. We have this sunflower. I don't know how many, I don't think I've actually counted specifically how many hands are in this. Someone said, Lucio said, every attempt, including the discarded footage in the end, was a draft to arrive at the final material. Yes, that's true. And again, there was never really any wasted time. Even if an experiment didn't work for something, I could use that knowledge for another purpose. So definitely, yeah. So for this sunflower, this is interesting. It was based on a real sunflower. I think I told you that that I often had things appear in front of me during the process where I wouldn't anticipate, and then I'd all of a sudden have a praying mantis above my bed. And this sunflower was actually on a walk in St. Albert, Alberta, in the middle of winter with my family, and it was just like everything's covered in snow, and then randomly in a tree there was this massive sunflower that was just really obvious to all of us for some reason. And on the way, and I clocked it, but I didn't really do anything about it, but I thought about it. And then on our way back, I think it was my father who was like, "What is that? Why is that there?" And there's something strange about it, so we ended up taking it home, and that was the inspiration for this. But you look at it and it's beautiful, but there's no movement, right? So how do you make this into something that moves? And so again, I told you that waving came in pretty handy during this process. Seems to be about 1,600 hands. It's a very good estimation. I think you're probably pretty correct, somewhere around there. I have counted a lot of the shots. Oh, the brain has, I think, 2,284 footsteps or something like that. But yeah, so this one I told you the waving came in really handy. So I'm never gonna get over saying handy. So this came in, again, there's the wave I showed you. Now I'm doing the muscle control of just the wave like this. Yeah, so it was like this little wave. And then I would just create a time delay. So you could kind of see just the shadows itself that would change so I would have to create it so that they were all off time a little bit as you're going out. And I will say so historically, I'm in a lot of my films. And it's an interesting thing because that's not really, mostly it's because I can make myself work really hard. That's the main reason. So I can sit there for hours and hours and hours and make myself figure something out. That's like the main reason that's why I'm in everything. So we have, I wish I knew how to say your name. Is it Jante Apun? That's cool. There's a diameter of around 4, wow, we have a mathematician. That's cool, yes. It's a good way of estimating it, good job. So we have that, and then obviously the eyes in the middle. There's a lot of those, hair on the background. I think I already showed you how I was lying over that broken space heater to get this part of the shot. But here's some of the hair too that I can show you a few of these shots. So I would get a lot of little pieces of hair like that. Yeah. And here's me waving my hands. so focused, because I didn't know if it was going to work. Didn't know if anything would. And the idea behind this shot, it's a very kind of spiritual feeling, but as we know, this woman is gone, and it's almost like the rebirth. You notice that the seeds at the beginning of the film, it's like the cell is an eye, and these seeds are an eye. So there's a theme of eyes being the basic unit of life. And also this flower, I call this image the seed, and it's something beautiful growing out of pain, and this rebirth of the death of something old and a new paradigm. So for this, the next thing we have after the seed, and we get this feeling of rebirth. And for some reason, I really wanted to go back to the ocean after. It's like, if you saw this woman fall off this cliff and you come over and you just look at the waves, right? There's always that feeling of the aftermath, and she's gone. So, and there's a few other reasons for this shot as well. The symbolism of, it reminds me a little bit of the river Styx, which is the river in hell, I think hell or the underworld, where there's souls. I really liked the idea, and it also reminds me though of being at a concert, right? All the hands in the air and the feeling of just and in some ways desperation too. So many hands reaching. It's like the human race. And so it's both an ending to the scene of the ocean, and it's a period in some ways, but it's also going back to this whole expression of all of humans. This was surprisingly hard to capture. I know it looks pretty straightforward, but like I didn't really, I think I did, I also played around with doing it from above, but it never really worked just based on the keying. I ended up doing it like this. I had to cover my face and then go like this. And that way my face was covered and it wasn't distracting. And it was also hard because of, again, as with some of the issues earlier on, I showed you some shots where I had to diversify the trees or the footsteps, because if you did the same one over and over, it would just be too obvious that it was the same footstep, the same trees. So I had to do a lot of different takes of different hands, because it shouldn't look like the same person. And I think that was one of the challenges. If you don't, when you have, say, I don't know, 300 people waving their arms, you get this natural organicness to the wave. And I had to find a way to recreate that quality of organicness, even though it was just with myself and a composite. Ryan asked, what part of the film did you enjoy the least? Enjoy. What part of making the film did you enjoy the least? I don't know that I really have that good of an answer to that. I think, I mean, the amount of time was just a lot, but that's not necessarily bad. It can be meditative. I think, but I will say that the workload was so beyond that I didn't have the option of not continuing in a way. But it was definitely a huge undertaking, and sometimes it was like just the sheer volume. How am I going to do this? But also, actually, I would say one problem was definitely how many files there are, and organizing them and keeping them all straight, and the fear. Because think about it: if one of these files is missing, you know, like what do you do? What if it's an important one? What if the file is the eyeball file that is, you know, the basis of thousands of like different layers? I can't lose that. And so I think there's a huge fear. I mean, I have a lot of hard drives and computers that all have the same things on them because I was terrified that I was going to lose the film. And that's another amazing aspect of the National Film Board, is when I knew it was in their hands. There's some good hands for keeping archives, and I thought, you know what, they have it. It's safe. That's a really good thing. So worst case scenario, the film exists. But yeah, wrangling files was still something that I'm learning about at this point for sure. So after she dies and we have this last wave, we come back to this. I knew that I wanted to make a beautiful lake. So you might remember, and I'm just going to actually go back a bit, because you remember the moment when the beginning where she's on this riverbank. And this is the first time you see the woman, right? Because you saw her you saw the river above, and then you get closer, and then this is the first time. And I like the idea on this shot that she doesn't really know you're there. You're seeing her for the first time from really far away, and it's this moment of self-reflection and questioning. And in this moment, she has some, I mean, I'll say this, like when I make art, generally what I'm doing is asking the universe something that it'll never be able to answer. It's me inquiring about a question just out to the abyss that I know I will never know the answer to. And there's something cathartic in asking the question. And so in this moment, she's doing that. And she's just confused to some degree, but trying to trust. And you notice that was the river, which is a body of water. And then we have her later on, after she's had this journey of running through this forest, which comes from, after that, this sort of escape. During the forest part, she's trying to, it's a flight defense mechanism, but it's that whole thing, you can't run away from your own feelings, you know? And so she has this whole journey, and then gets, as I mentioned, to the cliff. And here's the second significant body of water. So it starts with the river, and then we get this climax with the ocean, where she's, it's almost like, I really imagine this storm and everything being just so overwhelming that she can't even hear her own thoughts. And then it ends after her rebirth on another body of water, which is a lake. This is a one that I'm curious if you guys can figure out how I made it. Give you a couple seconds before I spoil it. Any idea that you were not able to do? Any, as in, I'm assuming what you're asking is there something that I wanted to make that I couldn't make? And the answer is, surprisingly, no, actually. But the only element that I really tried to do everything. I tried to do everything that I could think of, from cells to the universe, every element. The only thing that I didn't make was fire, but that was just because fire didn't feel right for the film. Because you have ashes, you have loss, you have, but it's a very spiritual feeling film, and it's not like a combustion in this film. I guess technically the black hole, you could argue that there's plasma. I guess it's not really fire. But I do think if I was to do fire, I would do it with a fan and my hair. I mean, it would be, because you just, you put a fan under and it goes like this. I feel like that would be the easiest way to do it, right? Something that will come up in a second is that I really wanted to put an octopus in the film, especially because of the tentacular theme that I was talking about earlier. In this scene, I really wanted to put an octopus, but it didn't really feel right. But then I made a discovery, and I'll tell you about it in a second, that really brought it all full circle. So, yeah, I think that's the only thing that I really wanted to put in it that I didn't. So this scene I made out of the veins in my eyes. So when I looked to the side, that was what ended up working. I tried a lot of things. Actually, I'll show you some of the things that I tried. This one was chaotic, as were many of them, as you've discovered. But maybe I'll show you some of the things I tried before that. I did play extensively with broken iPhone screens, which, again, the iPhone was one of the ingredients, the iPhone and my body. So technically, and I was thinking, because of especially the lines and the grid and how that it starts with this grid, and you'll notice that this is the first shot in the film that isn't with a grid. So she's transcended the grid at this point. She's no longer trapped in the grid, in the matrix, if you will. So I played around with using I actually went to an iPhone repair shop and asked them if I could have all their broken iPhone screens. And they gave them to me. But I did some versions of it that had broken glass on the sides, but I didn't end up using it. I think it just didn't work as well as I wanted it to. I also played with drawing, like painting again with my ashes from my hair, which wasn't great. So didn't end up going with that. But yeah, so when I where'd that go? The way that I did this, you can see your eye, you think of it as white, right? You think of the whites of your eye, but there's color to it. There's enough color. So when I saturated the color more, ooh, looked like this. Kind of like a sun, it was giving sunset. Oh no, there we go. Oh. Yeah, so it's giving sunset a little bit at first. And then I could also invert the color so then it looked more blue. So originally this scene, I did have it be in color. Oh, here's a version with the glass. You can see I tried to kind of play around with it, but I didn't end up using. But yeah, so this is the mountain scene. With I was really proud of myself for the color, I'm not gonna lie. But in the end, it just felt a little bit, I think it wasn't quite as elegant. So I just felt like for the good of the entire film, I had to drop the color, but I still am excited that I figured that out. And I don't even know, I honestly don't know how I made the mountains. I just kept multiplying it until it looked like mountains, I guess. And the boat we can see is my hands. I think this version has ashes on it. Wow, I keep doing that. Oh, there we go. And what was kind of nice about the boat was that the footage has a natural, even if I try to be still, a natural little movement to it. And it feels a lot like the rocking of a boat on water. So I was able to use that in the final version. You can kind of see the subtle movement. Yeah, just moving slightly up and down. And the wings, we can get to that maybe on the close-up, because I guess over here it might be a little too hard to see. So this part of the film, I will say, is like the longest shots of the entire thing. And I wanted this to feel like she had found a place that is peaceful and serene. And if you contrast this shot to the beginning of the film and the overwhelming terror of so many things, existential terror, and it should feel like an oasis. And I don't want to say heaven, because I think that's not exactly the idea, but yeah. So then it gets a little bit closer, and then it ends on this shot. Again, I was trying to light these within my 8 by 8 foot, my 8 by 8 foot bedroom. So that was really hard in this shot specifically because of my hair. I had to key that out properly, which was honestly really hard. And then you can see the wings. The wings were very complicated. I tried a lot of different things for the wings. They look simple now, but it didn't start that way. So originally, the original idea, I actually have a friend who's a really amazing animator, and he helped me by designing wings, and he did the whole movement frame by frame for me to recreate. And my original idea was to create the feathers out of my hands one by one, and this is so hard to explain, I really can't. But maybe if you can kind of see here, look at the movement and imagine it with a grid. Like, how do you create, I knew I wanted the wing to unfold, but how do you create, like think if this is, I don't even know how to show this, but let's say there's a little box right here, right? And you're looking at a wing with feathers. How do you even quantify how far the feathers are, like how far they go? How do you keep repeating them for more feathers coming in? It was like a nightmare. And I was having a conversation with my producer, Jeremy Mendez, and he had the idea. He just went like this. He went, and I was like, oh my God, that is what it is. That's the solution. But there's something beautiful about the idea that the woman is both cradled in her own hands and her wings are also her hands. And it's a very empowering symbolism about how she saved herself and reclaimed her own life. And something, as I was talking about with the octopus, because yes, I really wanted an octopus because of the tentacular thinking, as I was talking about earlier, and I never got my octopus, but these wings are tentacular. Look at them. They're made of little tentacles. So in the end, it still does indicate that shift of thinking from this grid-like structure to something that is sustainable and gives life. And that's the end of the film. So I'm curious, okay, let's see, Marcia said, curious if you showed the film first. Process is really interesting. Hi, Marcia. We haven't shown the film. It's not released online yet, so I mean, there's a lot of spoilers here, but yeah, that unfortunately it isn't going to be online until the fall. Right now, the only place you can see it is in Montreal on the wall of the historic Wilder building. So anyone who's in Montreal, you can go see it right now, any night from 8 p.m. until midnight. But yeah, there's some interesting themes that I've thought about a lot with the film. We talked earlier about whether it is dance film or not. So I'm curious if any of you have any ideas or thoughts about that. Because when you're recreating nature, like a tree moves, but it doesn't emote, right? A tree isn't, I mean, as far as I know, I'm not a tree, so I can't say for sure. But you don't know if when a tree is moving, it's not saying I'm sad. So, and in my definition of dance, I wonder, is it about expressing an emotion that makes it dance? Because the woman in the film dances sometimes, but is the movement dance? Anyone have any ideas on that? Any thoughts? And then another question that came up a lot was, is it animation? Which was a controversial subject, because animation classically, if you think about it, is, did I show the lightning? Oh, I didn't show the lightning. Did I show the lightning? Oh, I didn't show how it was broken down. I'll just show you that one, because that technically is animation to some degree, for sure. Because the lightning was done stop motion style. Oh, thank you. The lightning was stop motion in that I created the frames individually. So if you watch the pieces of the animation so if you look at each of the little squares, sometimes they're moving really quickly, and I had to do every single one of those frames separately. But then there's another part of the frame that has just a slow, keep pointing at it, but you can't see, has one lightning strike and then it fades, which is how lightning works. And I did that out of the cracks of my hands. I don't remember if I showed you that. It was like this. So that was the raw footage. And by shining a light on it, I was able to create contrast in the folds of my skin and the surface of my skin. But so the reason I bring this up, someone says a tree does not dance, but we can see it as a dance, projecting our emotions on the tree. That's a very insightful comment. I like that. It's very true. Because we're always finding human traits and projecting human traits onto nature. It's a very good point. But then, of course, it's also a question of different kinds of intelligence, as we talked about earlier, how octopi think completely different than us, but it doesn't mean they're less intelligent. Maybe they're intelligent in a way that we'll never understand, and probably trees have an intelligence that we don't fully understand, and because of, again, our society and I think people's fear of death, really, we separate ourselves from nature so that we can kind of try to control life more. And that separation, we place ourselves above nature so that we can control it. But really, maybe the intelligence of a tree is equally important and equally profound to the intelligence of a person. So, but going back to the animation, so technically, what I understand about animation is that it's made frame by frame. Most of this film is not made frame by frame. It's made out of videos, lots of videos playing at the same time. But then live action is people in real places. So it's complicated to decide what the line is there, because it doesn't really seem to fit into anything. And not just because, usually the reason it doesn't fit into a box is because something's experimental. But that's usually because of the storyline, because it's non-linear. But it's interesting to come upon a technique that there's just no place for. And again, it reinforces the atomization of things have to fit in boxes, or what do you do with them, that is unnatural, because it's not how nature works, it's not how life works. So I'm curious if any of you have thoughts on whether or not it's animation, because I've heard quite a few debates about that. And then the other question for me was even about how experimental it is, because sometimes, and this isn't a bad thing, but sometimes with experimental film, it can be difficult, in some ways on purpose, to break you out of your box, to break you out of complacency. So you're watching something that's supposed to disrupt your conditioning. And the way that I generally like to direct is I want it to be accessible, because I want it to be able to have an impact on anyone who watches it, whether it's a child or it's a philosophy professor. So this film, while it is experimental and while it is non-linear, is a story that I feel is quite accessible overall. And so that also creates a question of how experimental is it as well, if it's accessible and experimental in its practice, but not necessarily in its purpose. So we have here, someone said, I think it's animation. Excellent. I'm glad you think so, and I think in the ways it is too. There's another aspect of this film that was really important to me, which is because we live in a time when art is it's like fast art. Things are produced quickly, and they have a short shelf life. And this is also rebellion in that sense of wanting to create something that takes a really long time, and you can see the density and depth that went into each decision. And there is something to be said about quickly produced art. I think there's something very beautiful about that. But I also believe it's very important to preserve art that takes a long time and takes a lot of depth to create. And even though this film is only 7 minutes, it took 3.5 years, which of course is not rare for animation. Many animators take a long time with their films, but it's like instead of building this way, I was building this way. So it feels in some ways like making a feature, even though it's 7 minutes long. So that's one thing that I really love. Another thing that I love about actually the National Film Board in general is that it's an institution that preserves forms of animation creation that allows artists space to create something that's not to be consumed quickly, but something that's thoughtful and will actually stand the test of time through history because of the magnitude of the work, and not just creating to get likes or to get a fast click. That was really important to me. Ryan asked, will you be showing it in a similar way like in Montreal, in Toronto at some point? And I would love to. I don't have that planned at the moment, but it's definitely something I've thought about. And I love, one of the reasons it's very special, I mean, the building is very special overall, the Wilder building. Yeah, I'll show you the picture. The Wilder building is a very special place. It couldn't actually be more perfect for a lot of reasons. First of all, obviously, it's right next to the headquarters here, which is amazing. But the Wilder building also happens to be a building that it houses 4 different beautiful dance companies. It's a place called Espace Danse for that reason. And as someone who, my heart is dance, it's my home, that's what I know. And so having the first time my film ever plays on a building, having that be on a dance building is a profound feeling. And also it completes the work in some ways, because as you can see here, I want to show you one of the covers of Society of the Spectacle, the original cover, is on the side of a building. And why is that? It's because it's such a good example of people living in this segregated way where, again, just to reiterate what I was saying, where they're living in this isolated way, and they're looking at their screens, and this central mass media is what gives them connection. They're not connecting this way, they're connecting through this thing, which is why it's so hard, we all know now, not having social media. Or it's like everyone complains about it, but well, you have to do it. And it's a very interesting kind of relationship. So for me to have it on the side of a building, it completes the film as an installation that actually reinforces the themes of the film. So that being said, I have the ambition of being able to show it around the world on buildings. There's really no reason why not, because there's many, many buildings in the world. And that would be very cool to be able to see it in different places. There's an artist who really inspires me, who made Ashes and Snow. I'm trying to think of his name right now. He's my favorite. I just can't think of it at the moment, but he's my favorite artist. Gregory Colbert, and he's Canadian. And one aspect of his artistry that I really love is that he made himself a museum. He calls it the Nomadic Museum. Also check out Ashes and Snow. It's the most beautiful film in the world. He's a really good example, again, of slow art, because he made this film. It has elephants. You've probably seen clips of it. It's all slow motion, like kids sleeping on elephants and things, and it's shot on 35mm film, and it took him like 10 years to make or something, because it wasn't a forced image. It was, he would let the image breathe, and he would let the moments play out in real time, and when it was poetic, it just was. And so there's a power to the film that that is so rare. And so his strategy for showing his films was to have a museum that moves with the works, not exhibit in other museums. And there's something very empowering about that. And I liked the idea of doing a moving museum of the film that's on different buildings, that is almost like my own creation, our own creation. Trying to think what else I was. Sorry. Where was the? Oh, here it is. I was trying to think of these. So there were some, I'm trying to remember, yeah. Here it is. There were some quotes that I wanted to say, that I wanted to read to you that complete the work and that came from some of the references that I had that feel sort of similar energetically to the end of the film. So the first is, it's from Robin D.G. Kelly, and it says, "What shall we build on the ashes of a nightmare?" And that's very much in line with the thinking of Donna Haraway, and sort of with the book Staying with the Trouble, she's talking about how the world is what it is right now, and the only way that we can progress forward as a society is by meeting it empathetically where it is and moving forward together in a way that is more empathetic and more connected. So that's the question, is how do we as a society move towards something better? And another theme in the film was based on sort of like Taoist philosophy of acceptance and allowing things to be what they are, and peaceful resistance. So when we reclaim our own minds and we reclaim rest in our own lives and peace, then I hope that we can have conversations that will show us a way forward to a better world. Which one are we? So if you were on the YouTube, they do think it's animation. That's great. And someone else, oh yeah. So, and then Friendly Almond says, I'd have to disagree with them. Yeah, exactly. So is there any more specific thoughts from anyone? Any questions or comments? Does anyone have any takeaways or favorite scenes? Of course. Well, I'm very grateful to you all for joining for this journey that took me 3.5 years. And I would love to thank again the National Film Board for having me to talk about my process in the film. This has been so fun. And yes, 3.5 years recapped in 3 hours, not bad. Very true, a lot more efficient. So this is really cool, and I look forward to seeing you all again with something else. So take care.